And welcome to Unpacking Endpoint Management. Right now, Danny is going to be joining us shortly, but I'll go ahead and kick things off. We have a little bit of technical difficulty going on here today, but we have a very special guest here with us today. We have Mr. Matt Call, who has come here to talk about MDE Attach. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to get Matt on today, obviously cybersecurity is very timely right now. Lots of concerns going on in we're hearing all sorts of reports. I mean, we've been hearing about breaches and ransomware attacks and all kinds of other threats for a few years now, but recently it's been elevated even further with some of the findings from Microsoft's own research. And of course, we've had the SolariGate incident last year, and these various threats from nation state actors have caused many governments to act as well. The White House recently had its executive order that was mandating that all federal institutions step up their cybersecurity posture. And Matt, I work a lot with state and local governments now, and many of them are choosing to opt in as well. And looking at all those recommendations, many of them are getting EDR solutions and getting some advanced threat protection systems like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And so for a lot of those customers, they're looking at the best way to manage and control that from a single pane of glass. And with Microsoft Endpoint Manager being the kind of the glue that holds security together, I wanted to bring you on because this is definitely your specialty. This is your expertise. And we're very happy to have you here to talk about MDE Attach and some of the other security innovations that are happening with Endpoint Manager. So Matt, why don't you take a few seconds to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. I don't know if you can see me. Yeah, now you can. Hey, there's a red box and it says, hey, Matt's on the screen. So yeah, my name's Matt Call. I'm responsible, and my team is responsible primarily for what you would refer to as endpoint security and policy management. So I work on a great team of people who are awesome, who are responsible for all the policy and endpoint security experience that you see. And I sort of look after our MDE integrations and sort of our overall, user experience in the endpoint security blade in Microsoft Intune. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. I've spent almost, I don't know, I'm in my 10th or 11th year at Microsoft. They all go by so fast. I've spent a majority of my career doing endpoint management, at scale, as well as doing security-related things for different customers through our Microsoft consulting services, and then was on our customer acceleration team. And now I get to live my dream of building security experiences and integrations for our Endpoint Manager customers, which is awesome. It's awesome stuff. So that's a little bit about me. And Steve really gave a really good introduction about how important security is. I mean, we frequently talk about this thing that's called zero trust, right? And so many people think that zero trust is a thing you go buy somewhere and you flip a few knobs and you hire a vendor for, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they come in and all of a sudden, it's like, it's just done. And that's really not how zero trust works. That's not how we position it. That's not how the industry thinks about it. Zero trust is a state of mind. It's a pattern for implementation. It's something that we need to be aware of, and the integrations that we're building in Endpoint Manager help add fidelity to that zero trust experience. And that's really what we're doing today, and what we'll talk about a little bit with our security management for MDE scenario, as well as some of the other integrations and pieces that we're putting into Endpoint Manager to make sure that you have that trust but verify posture, to make sure that you have the crucial triad in the authentication chain, which is the resource, the user, and the device, right? So that's super important.
Excellent. Yeah, that's the key, zero trust. And of course, zero trust was outlined as well, and as a process and a almost philosophical approach in the executive order as well. So we've just recently had Ignite, lots of stuff going on with Ignite, and of course, we're really branding our security stack as Defender all up. Everything is now pretty much branded as Defender, and obviously there's reasons behind that. But The one thing I'm really interested in is how, and I think a lot of our attendees are going to be interested in as well, is some of the stuff that was announced around MDE attach. Can you speak a little to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So for most of our organizations, Microsoft Endpoint Manager is probably the largest by far endpoint management solution on the market today. We're in about 2/3 of customers, maybe more at this point. And what we've heard from customers is, we started this journey probably roughly a year ago. So what we heard from customers is, hey, it's great that Endpoint Manager is the core security management engine for Defender for Endpoint. It gives me a surface I'm familiar with. It gives me an existing channel I can leverage to deploy settings and policy, and it really makes it easy without me needing to manage a different tool. However, even though that's there, I have devices that can't be enrolled into Endpoint Manager for various reasons. Think about devices that are in a demilitarized zone, right? That are not domain joined, and they're sort of outside of the wire but inside the wire, right? Think about scenarios where maybe I use Configuration Manager on some of my devices, but not on some of my servers. And those servers don't necessarily go into Intune because of the lack of a mobile device management stack, right? So that becomes a really hard scenario. And also, what happens when I want to expand platforms and expand to different platform types like, Linux and other areas. So for us, we knew it was crucial to allow customers to leverage that investment that they've made in their M365 stack across the board, specifically in Endpoint Manager, in Azure Active Directory. So we started looking at ways that we could, build this better. What we ended up doing is with the security management for MDE scenario is we started building in a sort of a solution or a scenario where the MDE client itself that's baked into the operating system, as well as the new down-level server client that's available for Server 2012 R2 and Server 2016. That down-level client brings full sense back to those platforms and removes the need for the Microsoft monitoring agent, which is huge. But what we did is we looked at how we could take that agent, take that sort of client that's baked in or is the separate install on these down-level operating systems, and we could get security policy to that agent. Your security stance is only as good as the settings you deploy. And it seemed like a really heavy lift for these customers to jump through hoops or move through different areas just to bring a device into Configuration Manager or Intune. So we decided to build a scenario that allows MDE to do that seamlessly. And with that scenario, we have 2 or 3 sessions at Ignite on it. So feel free to go out and take a look at those. But in this scenario, what happens is when a device is onboarded to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, however that happens, remember, this is for mostly devices that aren't managed by Endpoint Manager. So if you're managed by Endpoint Manager, you have a seamless onboarding experience and you can deploy your security policy and everything through there. But if you're not, for whatever reason, you can onboard to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and flip on a security management capability. When that capability is turned on, we look to see if there's existing endpoint security policies being deployed to the device. And from there, if there isn't, through one of the existing MEM channels, then what we do is we actually fire up a new scenario for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, join Azure Active Directory or complete a hybrid join. And then the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint client actually uses that identity to check into the Endpoint Manager service and retrieve security policy just like any other client in Intune or any other client in Endpoint Manager, which really means, you don't have to be part of a management sort of story inside of your enterprise. Anywhere that's onboarded can take advantage of this scenario and allow you to have a consistent surface to configure those settings, whether that's antivirus, firewall, EDR, endpoint detection and response at launch. And then, very shortly later this year, early next, for tamper protection and attack surface reduction rules are sort of the next 2 things that we have up on the plate that the team's actively engineering. So that's sort of how we've envisioned this scenario. We expect to hopefully get to full parity in the endpoint security profile where, there might be some areas where it doesn't make sense. But for the most part, We plan on supporting I think there's 19 profiles in endpoint security over this channel, and we plan on supporting a full array of platforms. Right now, the team is actively engineering MDE security management for Linux, and hopefully we'll be able to release that in 2022. And then after that, we'll be looking at Mac OS to bring into this fold. So it won't matter who's managing the device. If you onboard with MDE, you'll be able to use security management features from the Endpoint Manager console. Does that make sense, Steve?
Absolutely. So where do I configure this? Where do I find this? Because, sometimes well, let me ask you this in a different way.
Sure.
Where should we be configuring security? If I'm a new endpoint manager admin, and because I'll notice there's security settings under configuration profile, I'll notice there's security settings, but now we've kind of changed around the console and we have this endpoint security blade. Is that where we should be doing things? Is that where we should be concentrating on for security management?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. This comes up pretty frequently. Intune specifically was sort of born as an MDM and is grown up into a full endpoint management suite, right? And you see some of that in the console, some of that growing. One place that you see that sort of growing, or that I guess you would call it that evolution, is in the security settings or policy settings plane. So there's three essential areas or three different types of policy that you can configure today: endpoint security policy, device configuration policy, and recently settings catalog policy. We're looking to we're in a bit of a transformation period right now, but the general rule should be if you're looking to configure one of the workloads that are in endpoint security today, start with endpoint security. We've taken a lot of effort to make it easy for you. If you look in the device configuration blade past, you'll notice that there are some workloads are spread across multiple profile types, and you could end up creating more policy than you need to, right? An example might be Defender Antivirus. I believe that some Defender AV settings live in device restrictions and then some in endpoint protection. So it can get confusing. That's the reason why the endpoint security blade was sort of born, was to manage settings based on the workload for our security professionals, to be a sort of translation surface and allow for ease of configuration. So for us, we start in endpoint security. If we can't accomplish what we need to accomplish in that scenario, then that's when we fall back to either device config or settings catalog. This is top of mind for my teammates on the policy team. We're taking steps every day to combine these experiences to make them easy. So hopefully in the future that you don't have to choose. It's just, whatever surface you're in, you see the policy that you've configured, and it's easy, right? But there's a number of steps that we need to take to get there, and the team's actively pursuing those steps. Even though it may not seem like you see a lot of sort of momentum forward externally, I can tell you that there's a lot of activity happening internally to get us to this sort of utopian state. But in general, starting with endpoint security is key. If I can't accomplish what I need to accomplish there, the setting doesn't exist. It's a workload like resource access, for example, that doesn't exist in endpoint security. Then back to our device configuration blade, where I can choose one of the existing templates or profiles that works for me, or I can use the settings catalog, which has roughly about 11,000 settings in it now, where I can pick and choose like a shopping cart. I can pick anything that I want out of that shopping cart and put it into a single policy. Again, removing the barriers of those templates, of those profile types that are coming from our long history in mobile device management. So does that make sense, Steve, or do you have any more questions on that?
I think we're good on that as well. What about those who might be concerned with baselines and regulation, and is there anything that we can do within MDE attached to transcend those to those devices that we may not be able to fully manage, or is that still beyond the capabilities?
MDE has a great functionality today in threat and vulnerability management, where we can start to look at different, when you say baselines, I assume that you're talking about things like, are my devices at a certain patch level? So there's two notions of baselines. Let's start there. baseline first with like patch level, version of app, that sort of stuff. We have application inventory and Intune to do some of that, and then we have the MDE product itself has a sort of pillar called Threat and Vulnerability Management, which allows you to get deep insights into patch levels, vulnerabilities, CVEs, all that sort of stuff on your devices, which is one of the great value propositions for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. In terms of baselines, the team's baselines for settings and policy, things like the Microsoft baseline, third-party baselines, whatever, right? Maybe the DISA-STIG, whatever it might be. We're looking at ways to integrate those better. Today we have an enforcement mode for the Microsoft baseline in Intune, and the team's actively looking at investments to see how can we make the baseline enforcement experience easier, because that's always an area of contention, but also the auditing experience better as well. I don't have anything to disclose right now about what we're working on, but I can tell you that it's top of mind for the team, and anybody who has any feedback on the baseline's auditing experience, whatever it might be, if that's important to your organization, you should do what I tell every other Microsoft customer to do. Be noisy to your account team, to anybody with a Microsoft Blue badge. Microsoft is the Titanic of ships. It's huge, right? It doesn't just turn on a dime, right? So we're doing our best to avoid the icebergs, to not hit the same fate. But your feedback is crucial to make sure that we prioritize the right things. So any experiences, scenarios, anything that you have in that space, we want to know about them. We want to know about them often. And we really value the feedback and opinions.
Excellent. And, one thing that you brought up as well that we should probably emphasize is a lot of these features that we're talking about from the endpoint management side is around basically, configuration, onboarding, ensuring that these devices are protected. Intune or Endpoint Manager is not there to replace the role of the Defender for Endpoint console for things like we're doing investigations, automatic remediations, we're doing advanced hunting. That stuff is still done from that console, and that's important to understand because usually that type of job, those type of tasks are actually completed by security operations centers, which may be differently organized structurally from the the end user computing and endpoint management folks. So that's really an important point to drive home, I believe, as well. So the probably the next thing that comes up a lot for that that I'm hearing from customers would be how much further are we going to take this integration with with MDE, and not just MDE but the rest of the Microsoft stack. We call it our E5 offering at Microsoft, where we have so many products out there. Is there going to be, for example, is there going to be Sentinel integration? How far is Endpoint Manager going to go in terms of integration with this, or is it too early to tell?
I don't know that it's too early to tell. I mean, every product set has its strengths, and one of the core strengths for the Microsoft product set is our integrations, right? Microsoft is uniquely positioned to provide integrations in such a way that can be unmatched for the most part by competitors in our space. What I mean by that is when you look at our security management or or even our risk integrations, right? Just the fact of the matter that an MDE device can go to a high risk, and within minutes, MEM can get that risk score, can mark the device non-compliant, and revoke access to resources via conditional access without any additional input from a user is just huge, right? And those sort of integrations are our strength, and we'll continue to build those integrations into our product sets, and we'll continue to invest in those areas. I can tell you, we just came out of our planning for the next 6 months, and all of these sort of integrations are top of mind for us, and they're things that we want to build. They're things we want to invest in. For us, it's more of a village type of strategy. strategy for security, right? Defender for Endpoint. I think you brought it up pretty well. I think you articulated pretty well. Like the security ops team is hunting threats and living in the Defender for Endpoint console, right? And we often hear from customers that like, hey, we want everything to be in one place, right? Like we want it to be in one tool. But the way that we're positioned and the breadth of experiences that we have makes that really hard without degrading one experience or the other. So we'll be looking at ways that we can maybe not integrate them. So, Endpoint Manager is part of Defender for Endpoint. But what we want to do is we want to build experiences where context from Endpoint Manager is in Defender for Endpoint. So if a security ops professional is looking at, hunting a threat, they can do things like see if the device is compliant that they're hunting a threat on. They can see things like policy application status. They can see things like when was the last time the device checked into MEM, right? They can start to see all these sort of pieces of context that don't live inside of the security operations portal, but they come from one of the tool sets that are part of our greater M365 solution. The same way goes in reverse for Endpoint Manager, right? I firmly believe, and I think the team firmly believes, that if you're a premium customer with Microsoft and you purchase Microsoft Defender for Endpoint or Microsoft 365 E5, you should be able to have those security insights that are provided as part of that tooling, no matter which point of the console that you're in. So the team is really looking at how not only how can Endpoint Manager provide more context to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, but we're also looking at ways that we can bring the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint data, the data that you pay for because you're an M365 E5 or Defender for Endpoint customer. How can we bring that data into other experiences and management to provide a richer experience, not just for the small set of security users, but for enterprise management users as a whole, right? Which provides tremendous value. And then on top of that, we'll start looking at ways that we can closely integrate specifically the security management experience into the Defender for Endpoint console, so we get less console fatigue, right? Like there's very little today. There's a number of experiences in Defender for Endpoint where if you try and go into a security management experience, it tabs you out to, as we call it, to Microsoft Endpoint Manager. But we feel like we can do better there. We feel like we can build deeper integrations, and the team is really focused on making sure that that's a seamless experience, making sure that we do things that make sense. That's really the key. We want to do things that make sense.
Absolutely, and it looks like Danny is here. Do my eyes deceive me?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Danny. I just recently actually had a wonderful Sunday barbecue brunch with Danny in person. Danny and I actually met in person a few weeks back, and of course, Danny looks exactly the same as he did pre-pandemic, even though I gained about 15 pounds. But
it's just the camera. It's just the camera. I lined up too.
But it's good to have you. Now, Danny, don't get mad at this question, but Matt, we might have a lot of customers out there that are looking to go fully cloud managed, for a lot of their new devices. They may bypass cloud attach. Again, don't get mad, Danny. Don't. Some of them are coming back with, looking at basically what are some recommendations for security? What are the easy buttons in the console I can go with? I hear baselines a lot of times are a go-to because they can just simply, click a button, apply a baseline, and pretty much ensure themselves that they're secure, especially if it matches some of the regulatory baselines that they might have to comply to, especially again in the federal and state and local governments out there and whatever sovereign policies. But when it comes to things like firewall baselines, what are some, I hate to use the term tips and tricks, but what would you recommend for these fully cloud managed devices from a security standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the baselines are an interesting conversation piece. The baselines are generated by our friends on the Windows team, right? And they're generated. We have a Windows Defender for Endpoint baseline generated by the Defender for Endpoint team, and they're really meant to be sort of foundational starter set settings, right? They're really meant to be that sort of that starting place for organizations. We've heard some feedback from organizations that when they try and implement baselines and they're already in like a mature, we'll call it device config status, that it can be troublesome, and we're looking at ways to make that better. But in general, when customers are starting with cloud managed devices, the baselines are usually the best place to start. These are security settings and configurations that are recommended by the people who own the product or the people that work with the product and from a management perspective. And what they do is they allow you a good starting place, right? So our baseline's functionality, Laura, who's one of my peers, owns baseline. She spends a lot of time, a lot of sweat and tears goes into baselines to make sure that they're a good experience. And you know, what we've built is, or what Laura's built is essentially a starting place for organizations when you're starting out that cloud-only journey, right? So when you start that cloud-only journey, you start with that foundation of baselines, you know, that Windows 10 baseline, the Defender for Endpoint baseline. And then what the best way to approach this is to see how that works for your organization and make changes to that baseline incrementally, right? You know, make that 1 or 2 change to increase the functionality or whatever, right? But minimize where you deviate from that baseline. Once you get that set, then it really becomes a set it and forget it type scenario. If you have anything that you need to add to the baseline that isn't included, this is where you go through and create additional device config or endpoint security profiles, right? Whatever it might be, to sort of create that, you know, I think about it like building a house, right? Like when you build a house, first you build the foundation, right? And that foundation should be the endpoint security baselines, right? So once you put the baseline down, then you start trying to figure out, okay, what do I need on the top floor? Do I need a kitchen? Do I need a living room? Whatever it might be. I layer those on top with my other security policies, whether that's endpoint security, device config, or settings catalog. I layer those on top. So that way it's clear to me where the settings are coming from, and it's clear to me what my end state is, right? The only thing where this differs, I guess, from a house is that every time we release a new version of the endpoint security baseline, what we're going to do is we're going to give you an experience to upgrade that baseline to the latest version and compare it against the previous version. So no more like you know, 13,000 line group policy spreadsheets that I crawl to see what the differences are. Now all I do is choose to upgrade my baseline to the latest version. I get a diff that shows me, hey, these are the settings that have changed. Do you want to take those new settings, or do you want to omit them? And then do you want to keep your existing customizations that you already had? So that way you're just swapping out the foundation underneath the house. And just like swapping out a foundation, there might be some growing pains that need to be handled specifically around the profiles that you've layered on top, right? But for the most part, it works pretty seamlessly. We get pretty positive feedback. Laura and the team are looking at ways to make this an even better experience in the future. They have a lot of open items to make this a better experience, a lot of things they want to do. So feedback from the audience here or anybody that's watching this video on, you know, what we should give priority and how we should approach it is super valuable to us. It's worth its weight in gold because the team has a lot of awesome things they want to do. It's just, you know, which things do we do first? You know, that's sort of the issue. So no worries. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Question for you. Can you pull up a demo? Like, show us how we would get started with endpoint security. Obviously you work with a lot of security stuff, and you know, every time I get an email about endpoint security, I ping you, right? Because I work with a lot of customers that have on-prem, and they're like, hey, how do we get started? So yeah, I figured if you got like a quick demo of how they can get started, that'd be great. Like, let's show the people some stuff.
I don't ever answer you, but yeah. That's usually the best thing, right?
Yeah, I know. Like sometimes our stories in sync. You know, sometimes people want to hear from Matt. You know, they come to me for tenant attached, cloud attached stuff, and I'm like, hey, let's go talk to Matt for endpoint security. But it is a hot topic, right? It's a hot topic that I think we both get asked a lot. Like me and you cross paths a lot when it comes to customers, whether, you know, they talk to you about something that the ball gets kicked to me, or starts with me, and then now I'm talking about security. Because
the irony is not lost on me that he's going to a tenant called Put Windows on It on a Mac.
Yeah, yeah. You know, funny
Isn't
thing
that the
is
truth,
here,
right?
we do a lot of Mac security policy too, and I've spent 10 years running a Windows device. I have no idea how to use a Mac, but we're still figuring out. We're learning. Everybody's learning here.
Yep.
So it's good. So let's talk first about the security management scenario, and then we'll go into endpoint security as a whole, so that way don't have to flip back and forth. So here
All right, I got your demo on the screen.
Awesome. So here is the security.microsoft.com portal, M365D portal. And if you're looking to light up our security management feature, which is currently rolling out, we'll be doing a gradual rollout. We want to make sure that we have the quality and we have the customer experience that we want. So we're slowly rolling this out over time. So you can expect to see it in your tenant soon. So if I come here to settings and go to endpoints, what you'll notice on the left-hand side is that I have a new toggle set here for configuration management. Here, I have essentially two toggles. One toggle is to turn it on for Windows client devices, and the other one is to turn it on for Windows Server. So you have the ability to say, hey, I want to do security management on just clients or just servers, right? We have a lot of organizations that are using our co-management features. And they may not want to turn it on for client or create confusion for client. So you can just turn that off. It's fine. It's important to note that for co-management, adding this feature on your devices provides no additional value, right? If you're co-managed and you're Intune enrolled, you already have the policy channel to get stuff from Endpoint Manager. You don't need to use our new security management channel. You can just use the policy channel you already have. No reason to set up two pipes going to the same place, right? But for those Windows Server devices which aren't capable of co-management, this could be a game changer. Once I flip these two toggles on, what's going to happen is that security management feature is going to get sort of enabled via the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint channel on the endpoints that are capable. The endpoints that are capable are Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows Server 2019, Windows Server 2022, with the November Patch Tuesday release, so the November 9th release. I don't remember the exact KB numbers because there's 4 different ones. And then Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2016, both with the down level server client enabled. So whenever you have any of those things there, this client will come down. Well, it won't come down. This client will be enabled, which is already resident on the device, and this scenario will kick off. So this enables that command, sending that command to the device, say, hey, light up security management. Once that's done, there's one other toggle that we need to set up. As with all of the endpoint security integrations with MDE, we require acknowledgement on the Defender side and on the Microsoft Endpoint Manager side. It's a thing we need to do. But anyway, right here at the middle of the screen here, you'll see allow Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to enforce endpoint security configurations. Flip this toggle on, and now you have on the MDE side, you have the clients getting told to enroll, the MDE agent being told to enroll into Endpoint Manager, and then this other toggle opens the gates on Endpoint Manager and says, hey, accept MDE client enrollments. That's the easiest way to think about it. Once these things are done, everything is just, hands off. The device will check to see if it has an Azure Active Directory identity already. If it doesn't have an Azure Active Directory identity, it will try and create one. If the device is workgroup joined, that includes an Azure Active Directory join to the tenant that these two services share. If the device is domain joined, the domain join process, or excuse me, the hybrid join process will take over, and MDE will initiate or sort of kick that hybrid join process to get you going in the right direction. So once that identity is on the device, then the device will enroll in the agent, the MDE agent on the device will enroll in Endpoint Manager. When I go into my Endpoint Manager console, I go into all devices view here. You'll notice that the MDE devices, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They'll all show up right next to my configuration manager, my co-managed and my Intune devices. They look pretty much the same. If I click here, you'll notice everything here looks pretty similar. I have this client. It doesn't show any primary user. This is a device-only scenario, right? It doesn't show any enrolled by, right? But all the hardware details, everything that you'd expect, all show here, which is great. Which is all great. When it comes to policy, you'll notice last week or the week before, whenever Ignite was, time is a blur right now, you'll notice that we added an additional platform to the Endpoint Security node at the top here, Windows 10, Windows 11, and Windows Server Preview. This is a new policy type that we'll be moving to over the next few months for all endpoint security policy. But this new policy allows us to target server platforms as well as this new MDE scenario. So if you want to test this scenario in public preview, you can create a new policy type right from here. I'll just select antivirus, and this is a familiar antivirus experience that you've seen in the past, right? Like everything is the same as it was before, right? We do have some additional scenarios for some additional settings that we'll be adding here, right? But everything here, for the most part, is what you'd expect. Tooltips, tri-state settings. We've done a little bit more work to make sure that the settings make more sense. This is all based on our settings catalog infrastructure, right? So you'll see the same strings across. Hopefully we'll be moving all of our profiles to the settings catalog infrastructure. So that way, all the profiles have the same strings, they have the same values, consistency across the UX, which is key. Once I get done here, all I'm going to do is deploy this out to my Azure AD groups, right? I can group those devices and those MDE devices in Azure AD groups the same way I do any other device. If I'm coming from on-prem and this device is hybrid joined, I can sync my AD groups to Azure AD and use those for targeting, whatever works for you. If you wanted to create dynamic groups, we've added 2 additional tags. We call them system labels in Azure AD to allow you to group only MDE devices together. So if a device comes through this channel, this management channel, you could do things like create a dynamic group that would automatically add it to this group when it comes to the MDE channel. So you get to apply like default antivirus policy or whatever it might be. So we made a lot of advancements there. But the thought here is that the devices are just in the same plane, in the same surface. MDE devices are there. If for any reason your device becomes Intune managed, right? What'll happen is the MDE channel will shut down. The co-managed or Intune only channel will spin up. And because we're using the same Azure AD object and the policies apply to both MDM and MDE devices, it'll get the same policy, the same everything, all directly from the Endpoint Manager console, which is awesome. So does that make sense? Anything else you want me to add here, Danny? Anything else that that you think's valuable?
Nah, man, it's all spot on. I mean, Steve, what do you got? Anything? I do have some other questions. I want to make sure Steve doesn't have anything.
Yeah, Steve is trying to figure out how to use his mute button. He hasn't figured it out yet.
We do have a question in the chat. I think I understand the question. Sometimes there's some troubleshooting false positives that can happen as a result of antivirus and security software. And I believe the question was, is there any kind of way to, I assume from the console or plans to temporarily disable Defender for troubleshooting purposes to eliminate that as a contributing factor?
I can't really talk about that scenario at the moment. What I can tell you is troubleshooting scenarios for Defender, specifically for Defender for Endpoint and Defender antivirus scenarios, is top of mind for us. We're looking at ways to make that easier in the future, and you should keep your eye out on our blogs and specifically from our Defender for Endpoint friends on news on this in the future. But we're looking at making the troubleshooting scenarios easier. We're looking at a bunch of things to get done. And I don't want to speak on a turn about any of that stuff because I'm not, it's not something firsthand I'm working on, but I can tell you that there are very smart people that are making troubleshooting easier for Defender for Endpoint in the near future and Defender AV. Yeah, we should wait to see what they release and how they think about it.
Well, they're working on doing this from a surgical level rather than a sledgehammer approach as well, which, when you're troubleshooting, a sledgehammer approach can be dangerous. So that makes total sense. I
agree. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. We should do better there, and I think the team is going to do better. We just gotta give them some more time to release those things into the wild before we can talk about them.
So
back to you, Davey.
So yeah, Matt, I'm super jealous that you got to go out to MMS. So I guess I'm interested because we haven't gotten to talk since you've been back. What what got the people excited? What messages did you land there? As well as when customers watch your Ignite videos, what message do you want them to like really sink in as they watch those videos? So yeah, feedback. Like tell us what got you excited, what got the people excited, and tell us what messages you want customers to really hear when they watch your videos.
Yeah. Well, hopefully I say those messages in the videos, and if I don't, I think that's a big problem. I'll work on my scripts and such, but I don't. It's an on-running joke. I don't really prepare scripts. Yeah, I mean, for us, one thing that's clear from our recent visit to MMS, which it was great to see everybody. If you haven't investigated conferences and stuff in a long time, MMS is a great forum specifically for the management and security space. One thing that struck me is how focused everybody is on security. When I went 2 years ago, or I was at a couple external events 2 years ago, I got mostly management questions, right? Like, how do I do this with OSD? How do I do this with send and attach? How do I do, how do I implement a CMG, right? Like, now one thing that I think is really changing for the management industry as a whole is management professionals are starting to think about how they contribute to the larger security story, the security management story specifically. We use this term security management to like overload settings for security, but really security management is like this pillar of thought, like for management people, like how they contribute to the wider story. And I think with zero trust sort of becoming this concept that is taking off, I think one thing that's clear is that all the management professionals I've spoke to, both in person, at virtual conferences and all that sort of stuff, everybody's thinking about the way that they contribute to that greater story. And on the management realm, that's the device piece of the triad, right? We compete at some level to resource access and to users, but for most management professionals, it's that device pillar. So how do I, key pillars of zero trust, how do I securely manage a device? How do I make sure that device is in the posture that I want, right? And how do I make sure it gets that posture, it gets auditing on that posture, no matter where it is, right? And that's where our cloud scenarios really help out, or using Cloud Management Gateway through Configuration Manager, or connectivity via VPN. These are the things that people are thinking about. So that way, when a device is off the network, which is like 75% of organizations' devices right now, how can I make sure that the device is still secure, right? And how can I make sure that my management tools are contributing to that identity, right? So, one thing that's probably near and dear to your heart, Danny, since you and I sort of come from the same background, is, a long time co-management was like, hey, I can't enable co-management because it requires hybrid join.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's like if you're thinking about hybrid join just giving you co-management, like you're doing it wrong, right? Like
you're doing, absolutely.
Yeah, hybrid join, like Matt Call's view of the world, hybrid join is issuing your device a driver's license so it can go on an airplane, right? Like this is what's happening. And hybrid join is giving you these things, right? It's not just giving you co-management. So, yes, we want to get devices to cloud only, right? The cloud only state, Azure AD join has a ton of different benefits. One of the main benefits for me anyway is the limitation on lateral movement. It's much harder to move laterally on a device that's Azure AD joined, right? I mean, it's not impossible, right? Nothing's impossible in the security space, but like it's far harder than it is with a normal AD joined device, right?
Oh,
yeah. So like
dependencies, requirements, like all of those things that you got to worry about, those external factors that I brought up quite a bit in my Ignite videos, right? Like I don't know, like I feel like we're getting to this space right now where we're talking about, and I was actually going to ask you this, like I'm not afraid to tell customers, like, well, not that they're doing it wrong, but hey, look, maybe if you think about it different, things will be easier this way, because you're trying to, I guess, transparency. You can't take a new shiny tool and do the old stuff with it, because eventually what you're going to end up with is the same old stuff that you're trying to get away from, just with a new tool, right? So the evolution of whether device management, security, your posture, your attack surface, it doesn't just evolve with the technology. It has to also evolve with the mindset, right? Because if you don't evolve the mindset with the technology, 3 years you're gonna look back and be like, I got the same thing I did just with a new shiny tool. Exactly. Like, so it's kind of sometimes it can be a tough message to hear, but sometimes it's a right message. I wouldn't even say sometimes. Like, I'll be straight up. I think it's the right message, right? When customers talk to us and we are expected to be that trusted advisor for them, right? Give them the right information. It's sometimes the information they need to hear is not the easy path, right? It's not the easy path. You have to collaborate, get in a room and figure out how this process that we engineered, right, needs to innovate to get to be more modern so that you can be at your destination, whether that be cloud attached, whether that be cloud only. I think everybody wants the destination of cloud only, but the path that you get there can be bumpy, rocky, smooth. We give you all the tools, right? That's kind of the thing, right? Here are the tools. You got to figure out how to use them, because at the end of the day, flipping that story around, when I was the IT director, it's like Microsoft's telling me all this stuff, but I have to go figure out what works for me, because my end users aren't calling Microsoft. My end users are calling me, my help desk, my team, to solve the problem. So I give them the information, let them put it together in their own way, right? But they got to have the facts, not the FUD, to actually make the right choices.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think the other thing that I would say too is, you should just ask yourself, you should say self, what are the priorities of my security team, and what are the priorities of my business, and what are the priorities of my XYZ different verticals inside my org, and how am I contributing to those? And if you don't need to make your whole job making other people at your company successful, although that would be a good way to be a team player. That doesn't need to be your only job, right? I think what's resonated with me, at least over the last 14 months, is like 6 years, it feels like, is like, we've been engineering in Plato's cave for so long as management professionals, and likely as security professionals, that we don't really have the context. We're just trying to do everything in our job the best way possible. And I think just stepping back and tying what you're doing to a broader goal, a broader piece to move your organization forward is really the key. And that's, if nothing comes out of Zero Trust, which I'm sure that a ton of stuff will, but if nothing else comes out of it, what will come out of it is sort of unifying this effort inside of organizations to get to a place, right? Even if an organization can never get to that place. I know some people watch this where like, yeah, my organization can never do it, whatever. The fact that you are like all going towards this goal is going to bring your organization together and like make you think about the ways that you do device management, you do user management, you do resource access, and making you think about how you need to change those things. And I think from the management perspective, specifically on the device perspective, we have a lot of opportunity, because traditionally the device has been sort of trusted because of a point-in-time transaction, i.e. a domain join. And with this new world, we need to trust but verify all the time, but we can only do that if we know who you are. And we only know who you are if you have a trust to Azure Active Directory or to some other identity service that has context that can use it as part of the identity authentication transaction. So like that is where hybrid join, it doesn't just get you co-management, which is awesome. It also gets you the ability to measure that device and know exactly who is asking for what. And that's really the key. Like, where's the user coming from? So that way, we talk about this premise of adaptive access. And that's one of the key pillars like that you need to understand is, I want a user to have this many bars when they're on a trusted device to hop over. But if they're not on a trusted device, I don't want to block them from doing their job. But maybe I don't want them to be able to download, sensitive documents or access resources without MFA. And that all comes because I can tell who the device is, right? If in my organization, I can't tell who the device is, or it's a point in time, it's not as durable of a measurement as it would be if the device can say, hey, I'm device A, and then I can look and say, oh, look, it has antivirus, firewalls turned on, BitLocker's enabled, and oh, MDE says this is low risk. I feel good about this transaction, right? So it's super important.
Well, we got 10 minutes left. We got
one more question.
Steve, we got one more question and we'll close it out and give the people back some time.
we are currently trying to implement controlled folder access. Do you have any recommendations and things we need to pay attention to? And then they get into the kind of the signal and noise stuff here. To make sure this has minimum impact, we currently audited data. Audit mode is already on via Defender for Endpoint, but it gives so much information that it's hard to break that down for good insights and what to do with the information. That sounds like good feedback for our NDE team, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think CFA is interesting. It's an interesting implementation. The audit data is interesting as well. I think it's the noise problem that we need to get through. I think the Defender team does a great job with being able to dismiss alerts and do that sort of stuff in their console. But yes, you're going the right way, auditing first. If you have a large amount of data coming back from CFA, that probably means that it might have a really large impact on your organization. So you probably implemented CFA widely. If you've implemented it widely, your next step is to go enforce on a subset of devices, right? I think what you've determined with getting all this noise back, I call it noise. We'll call it great informational data. You by getting all this great informational data back, what you've done is you've sort of now understand the barometer in your environment. You go, okay, this could be impactful. So I need to roll this out slowly. I need to do it in a controlled fashion. It's not something that I can just flip on overnight. So yeah, I can take that information back for our friends on the Defender platform and the EDR cloud side to see how we can make that data better and make sure it's a better experience. But I think what you've found out is you need to do a bit more controlled rollout than probably some of your peers, because it seems like it'll have a large impact to your organization. So yeah,
I'm writing that down. My new replacement for noise. Matt, you're a romantic god. You were.
yeah, great information that is overwhelming. Yeah. So yeah, it's cool. No worries. I'm glad you're rolling out CFA. It's a huge mitigation. Everybody should turn on tamper protection. If you don't already have tamper protection turned on, turn it on. We've done a lot of work to make the tamper protection scenario awesome, and we'll be announcing some advancements in that scenario probably next week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And yeah, tamper protection and CFA will help protect you against human-operated ransomware, or humor as we call it internally. The bane of everybody's existence, because it's not funny at all. It's just like humor is like human-operated ransomware. It's like, okay. So yeah, super awesome. Keep up the good work, and yeah, make sure your devices stay secured. That's the key.
All right, Matt. Thanks. Steve, special thanks to you for starting the show and dealing with my technical difficulties. Thought my headset died this morning. Matt, really thanks for being on the show. Endpoint security is always something that crosses all our conversations as we work with customers. So appreciate you giving, pulling the veil back on that and having some dialogue with the audience. Small plug for the next show. We will have probably one more show before the end of the year. That will be about cloud attach, really demystifying cloud attach. A lot of the conversations I know I've been having with Steve and other Microsoft field people is helping customers demystify cloud attach, why they should do it, and some of those low risk and no risk type actions they can take to at least get some cloud value. Endpoint security, absolutely one of them. So Matt, I'll probably invite you back for the next show as we demystify cloud attach. We don't have a date for it yet, but it will actually be pretty soon. So keep an eye out on the blog.
I'll be bringing myths to bust.
There you go. There you go. Mythbusters, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate everybody spending time with us today. Thanks, Matt, again, and everybody have a good day.